Hi, my name is Joe Foy and I'm National Campaign Director for the Wilderness Committee. We're a Canadian environmental organization concerned with wilderness protection. This is a video slideshow about our wilderness saving activities which run from May of 2009 until April of 2010. It runs for about a half hour. I hope you enjoy it. We started off in May by reopening the community farm in the Statlium village of Seton Portage. Then Ben West, our Healthy Communities campaigner, working with ally groups like the Gateway Sucks organization and SPEC and the Burns Bog Conservation Society, all coming together to fight the government's Gateway freeway expansion plans.
Okay.
All right, so thanks everybody for being here. My name's Ben, I'm from the Wilderness Committee, and we're here today because we've got this report, the top 10 myths about the Gateway Project. Kevin Falcon's office is back here. He's the Minister of Public Transportation, or Transportation and Infrastructure for British Columbia. We want to make sure that when people are talking about the Gateway Project, they at least understand the implications of this project, because it is going to eat up our farmland. It is going to negatively impact Burns Bog. It is going to have a really nasty impact on climate change, and it's going to have a whole bunch of other really serious repercussions for this area. So, we think that it's just totally morally reprehensible that this project is going ahead as planned, and we want to make sure that folks understand what their money's being spent on.
Led by our beloved mascot, Tum Tum the wild salmon, we continued our work to educate people about the need to shut down BC salmon farms now in order to protect our wild salmon stocks. We gathered names on petitions and put on rallies throughout the entire year.
Well, I live real close to the banks of the Brunette River, and I spent my whole life living in communities along the Fraser River. And I'm happy to report today that at Fort Langley and at villages and towns and communities all up the lower Fraser River, the pink salmon are coming back home. You can see them rolling in the river. It's a beautiful sight, and it's a one that we should all rejoice at. But the sockeye salmon have not come back. We have suffered a horrible crash of sockeye salmon numbers. The chum salmon up the coast have been declining and declining with disastrous results. Less grizzly bears on the river, less people working in the wild salmon industry, and it would seem to me that the managers of the fisheries resource should understand what every kid who lives along the Fraser River knows, that salmon are mysterious, and it makes sense to show precaution when we're managing salmon.
Live from Global British Columbia, the News Hour. Here's Tony Parsons.
Good evening, and we begin with alarming new evidence of the impact of the disappearing salmon in this province. Bears, grizzlies are dying along the salmon creeks and rivers of the central and north coasts. They are starving to death. The bears' very survival depends upon the salmon runs in the fall, which allow the bears to fatten up before their winter hibernation. But several years of low returns are having a devastating effect on the bears, and conservationists are now urging both the federal and provincial governments to take immediate action.
The grizzly bear is one of the most vivid icons of BC's wilderness, but conservationists say the species is in grave danger. They say a collapse of the salmon run along the north and central coast of BC is causing grizzlies to starve and die. The province says it doesn't necessarily disagree with the observations, but says it's too early to draw conclusions. Chum are the mainstay salmon for grizzlies. Conservationists say the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the province are ignoring concerns and permitting overfishing, which they believe could lead to an ecological disaster.
The evidence is in. The salmon stocks are crashing. We've had a Fraser River sockeye salmon crash. Now we've got a coastal chum salmon crash, and people are reporting all up and down the coast the bears just aren't there. It's time for action.
The Department of Fisheries and Oceans admits the chum species along the Central Coast has been depressed for a number of years, but says it has a number of management action plans in place. Still, conservationists want a total ban on the chum salmon fishery and the cancellation of the fall grizzly bear hunt, which opens tomorrow, so the population can return to normal.
We published and widely distributed one of our newspapers that makes the case for ending the practice of farming salmon now. Then it was off to the southern Okanagan for a tour by our friends and allies, the local folks there who are working so hard to see the proposed South Okanagan-Similkameen National Park become a reality. We produced this mail-in opinion card calling for national park protection. It's one of Canada's greatest conservation opportunities, the move to protect the South Okanagan-Similkameen area as a national park. These are wildlands up for consideration around the towns of Karameas and Osoyoos in southern British Columbia. White Lake, with its exotic wildlife, its dryland wildlife, rattlesnakes, the cactus, are one of the many areas that are being considered for national park protection. Vassaw Lake, an area incredibly important for wildlife from the rich, lush valley bottom area near the lake up onto the dryland slopes, where you can see pictographs of the Okanagan tribes and all around the herds of the California bighorn sheep. Then we were back in Statlium territory. Andy Miller, our field operations manager, led several trail building projects in and around the fabulous Lost Valley. Our base of operations were the communities of Seton Portage and Aquatqua. And we were working to see this region in the Cayush Range gain protection. There are now some 50 kilometers of hiking trails throughout this spectacular area. And this is one of the finest wilderness areas we've had the pleasure in working in. That's Lost Valley. It includes Melvin Creek and all this, most of the Cayush Range. Throughout the year, staff members at the Wilderness Committee come to plan out our nature-saving campaigns several times over the year. In July, our volunteer trail builders were hard at work once again in Statlium territory west of Lillooet, BC. This time they were clearing a trail to the Graveyard Valley, another at-risk wilderness area in the Chilcotin Ranges. Our Rivers at Risk campaign was very busy this year. We published and distributed a mail-in opinion card and an educational newspaper on the campaign to stop private hydropower developers from taking over BC's rivers.
I'm here tonight to explain why private power isn't good for our rivers, our economy, or our environment. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Wilderness Committee. We're an organization that was founded 30 years ago in British Columbia around the kitchen table, and we're a grassroots organization that has 30,000 members and another 30,000 supporters. And we work to preserve biodiversity. We work to fight against climate change. We're working to introduce endangered species law in British Columbia. We're trying to stop urban sprawl, and we're working to protect the agricultural reserve lands also. But what I'll be discussing tonight is how I originally thought, the Wilderness Committee originally thought, that private power was the right solution for British Columbia. But upon digging deeper, we realized that environmental standards had been gutted in 2002 under the auspices of streamlining, that ministry biologists were pressured into signing off on projects, and that the Environmental Assessment Office was broken.
We visited several endangered rivers and took part in debates and protests.
So we brought with us today blank check to represent the blank check that the Premier is giving to the private power producers of British Columbia. And people should try to guess how many $1 billion the Premier has already ordered BC Hydro to sign for from these private power guys. I won't leave you hanging. It's $31 billion so far they've forked over to the private companies. And so we're here today to say that this river privatization is killing off our rivers and it's looting the ratepayers of the province. If the Premier allows the Butte Inlet project to go through with a diversion of 17 more rivers, we will all be on the hook for over $50 billion.
In Kootenay country, huge crowds turned out to successfully oppose a private hydropower project slated for the Glacier and Hauser Creeks. On Vancouver Island, our own Annette Tanner opposed cuts to the provincial park budget.
BC Parks, but he's concerned about Victoria's plan to cut the number of park rangers this year.
Especially the fisheries part, there's going to be a lot of illegal fishing and overcatching because the wardens aren't there.
He's also worried about extra vandalism and poaching, a concern shared by others. Today in Cathedral Grove, a handful of people were handing out pamphlets detailing their concerns about cuts to BC's parks.
We're handing out information about our parks because we'd like to keep them.
The concerned park users are hoping their effort will increase awareness about the cuts, and public pressure will force the government to reconsider and spend more money on this resource that so many British Columbians enjoy.
We produced and distributed this educational newspaper on the need for better protection for Canada's endangered species. And we mounted a successful court challenge.
Animals, the federal government has been convicted of breaking its own laws. In a landmark ruling, a federal court judge in Vancouver has ruled that the federal Minister of the Environment broke the law by refusing to identify the critical habitat of an at-risk species. The judge condemning the feds for claiming to not be able to find those habitats when just about anybody can go on a guided tour to those areas. Linda Aylesworth explains.
They're called sage grouse, birds famous for their elaborate courtship rituals. To see them, you'd have to travel to the southeastern corner of Alberta. That's because BC no longer has any. And soon enough, it's feared that Alberta won't either.
The main cause of decline of species in Canada is loss or damage to their habitat, the places where they live. Over 86% of Canada's species are in decline because of loss or damage to their habitat.
And the sage grouse is no exception. Protecting the critical habitat of this and Canada's many other threatened and endangered creatures was the very reason our federal government passed the Species at Risk Act years ago. So why are they still in trouble?
What's wrong is that even though they passed the act, they didn't do anything afterwards. So the act was passed in 2003, and from that point on, the government dragged its heels.
So while hundreds of animals were listed, none of their critical habitat was being identified and protected. Not even the most famous of species, like BC's own Vancouver Island marmot.
We thought if they won't protect the habitat of the Vancouver Island marmot, which is one of the best known endangered species in all of Canada, what species will they step up to the plate and protect their habitat?
So the lawyers at EcoJustice and the conservationists at the Wilderness Committee, both BC-based nonprofit organizations, joined forces to change the way things weren't being done. 3 years ago, they went to the federal court and they brought the story of the sage grouse with them. Finally, last week, a decision.
And the judge sided with us completely. And what he concluded was, The Minister of the Environment can't use the law at his discretion. The law is clear. It says that you have to identify critical habitat, and that the minister erred when he failed to do that.
Aired big time, because while the critical habitat of the sage grouse is common knowledge among bird watchers, the ministry's recovery team said they couldn't find it.
This judgment that seems to apply to sage grouse applies to killer whales, applies to Vancouver Island marmots, applies to bluebirds, and applies to beluga whales. So it's really exciting, and it means we actually might have a tool in our hand to use to prevent species from going extinct in Canada.
But even after the federal government identifies the habitats needed by species at risk to survive, it's up to each individual province to do something about it. In this, BC is particularly lacking because we have the unfortunate distinction of having the most species at risk and the worst protection record.
In the Clayoquot River Valley on the west coast of Vancouver Island, we were busy this year re-clearing the trail we had originally built back in 1993. This amazing ancient forest is part of the Taloquiet First Nation recently designated Houtman Tribal Park, which we produced one of our educational newspapers about. Then, back in the Metro Vancouver area, in Surrey, we helped to clear the South Fraser Witness Trail to bring attention to forests endangered by the Gateway Freeway expansion plans of the provincial government.
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Eric Doherty. I've been working on this trail for quite a while, along with Kevin and Tom from Surrey. And I did it first as an employee of the Wilderness Committee.
Hi, I'm Ben from the Wilderness Committee. I guess I just want to echo what Eric was saying about how stoppable this project is, and I guess maybe just add a little something about how significant I think this is. Not just to this region and this forested area, which is such a beautiful place, and I think it really highlights what's at stake, because a lot of this could be gone. What I wanted to really highlight about this highway is that just last a couple months ago was the Copenhagen Climate Change Convention, and climate change is the most serious threat facing humanity today, and I think where we are right now is ground zero of trying to stop climate change in British Columbia.
Located up the Cameron River from world-famous Cathedral Grove on Vancouver Island is the Cathedral Canyon. Gary Murdoch from the Wilderness Committee's Mid-Vancouver Island chapter shows us the ancient forest they are seeking to protect.
Here we are in spectacular Cathedral Canyon. It's one of the most incredible forests left on Vancouver Island in a floodplain. Right next to the Cameron River, we have trees marked here to be logged within a few feet of the river's edge. This canyon, I think, is a national treasure. I don't know of many other places so special as this. The huge western red cedar trees and Douglas firs, some very, very big yew trees along in the canyon, some spectacular cliffs and plants. The wildflowers here are just incredible, and the berry bushes all through this old growth forest.
Then Gary took us to nearby Labor Day Lake, another area of old-growth forest in the Cameron watershed that the Wilderness Committee is seeking to protect.
Here we are at Labor Day Lake, and right across the lake you can see where an older clear cut that's been replanted, And the plans are to log that old-growth forest all along the edge of the lake there, in the lower parts and somewhere up the hill. I'm not sure how far up the hill. This is a basin of remnant old growth all around Labor Day Lake. It starts there and goes all the way around and up to Mount Moriarty. And there's a unique basin of yellow cedar, mountain hemlock, and amabilis fir in this area. The wildflowers right now are phenomenal. In the fall, the blueberries are unbelievable, blueberries and huckleberries. So we think that this whole area should be made a park, and while we're at it, continue down the Cameron River, take in Cameron Canyon, and right down to Cathedral Grove would make just an incredible wildlife corridor and an incredible park to save for future generations. Much, much more value in that than clear-cutting this low-value, high-altitude yellow cedar and mountain hemlock.
The Wilderness Committee's Manitoba office was busy protecting boreal forests this year with 2 new publications. We were very proud when our outreach coordinator in Manitoba, Robin Bryan, won a prestigious Brower Youth Award for his successful work to build support for ending logging in Manitoba's provincial parks. In 2008, this resulted in almost 1 million acres of boreal forest gaining full protection. Once again, we were part of another big court win for Canada's endangered species. This time it was a little fish called the Nooksack dace. And once again, the courts ordered the federal government to identify and protect its habitat. In September, we headed out to Clayoquot Sound for a little beach cleanup party at Kennedy Lake.
Ben, what do we got in the bags?
Well, we got some broken glass and some other interesting items. This is all recycling here. Do you see that? Good stuff in there. We got a tripod thing in here. Behind over here, we got the car seat.
Oh, more exotic stuff.
That's the prize there. We've got some other used tire. Mystery items here. This looks like some car parts, maybe. Oh, yeah.
On Mears Island, also in Clayoquot Sound, our volunteers re-clear trail up Lone Cone Mountain and along the Big Tree Trail. Our aim here is to see the BC provincial government honor Mears Island's Tribal Park designation. Then it was off to Seton Portage and Statlium territory one more time to help harvest the community garden.
Check this out, more cucumbers than you can shake a stick at. beefsteak tomatoes, so beefy they moo. And of course the pinto beans. Look at those giant pods. And we know chard's not that hard to grow, but damn, it's pretty stuff. Wow, look at that BJ holding the bounty from the garden. Gloria's feast. What'd you cook for us, Gloria? It wouldn't be deer, would there be? Are you kids gonna eat all the vegetables from the garden?
In October, we helped to organize the Bridge to a Cool Planet event.
On behalf of Vancouver City Council, and to welcome you to Bridge to a Cool Planet, Vancouver's contribution to the International Day on Climate Action. We are united in our passion for our future, and that future depends on our federal government coming together along with all the other governments around the world to take action on climate change. In some cities like Oslo, people are celebrating the leadership of their national governments. The same is not true here in Canada. There was a time, though, that we were proud of our local leadership. But in the most recent climate negotiations in Bangkok, Canada's only notable contribution was the prompting of 77 developing nations to walk out based on Canada's weakness of position. But there's hope. Your presence today is a wake-up call to Ottawa. Canadians want to be part of their government, and that means Ottawa needs to commit to strong cuts in emissions. While we as a city do not have the ability to compel Ottawa to speak for the people, we can provide the stage for people to speak, you, and that's why we've done this today. We are proud of our partner, Bridge to a Cool Planet, and why we will continue to be a strong voice for Canadian action on climate change. I want to especially thank Councillor Andrea Reimer, who is here today with us, for working with the organizers to make this possible.
We're all taking another.
Take action! Take action! We get some satisfaction! Change policy, not climate! Change policy, not climate! Change policy, not climate!
The Wilderness Committee became advocates for a population of western painted turtles that were endangered by a dredging operation in Burnaby Lake. We were able to delay the dredging until the turtles could be kept safe. Guided by local conservationists, we visited an amazing grove of old-growth forest on Sumas Mountain in the Fraser Valley.
Everybody, we've got this beautiful big Doug fir here. We call him Opa, and he's in the center of a viable old-growth forest on Sumas Mountain, and it's 29 feet in circumference. There's not a lot of those left in this province. Certainly not very many in the Lower Mainland. So we believe this area is absolutely essential to be protected.
Much as the one in Victoria that's
We published another one of our newspapers calling for an end to logging these old-growth forests, as well as several mail-in opinion cards, and we put on a rally in Victoria demanding an end to old-growth logging.
And we've had hundreds of people brave these heavy rains to send a message to the BC Liberal government that they've got to save our remaining old-growth forests on the south coast, ensure sustainable second-growth logging, and ban raw log exports.
In November, we held our annual general meeting. The winner of this year's Eugene Rogers Award was B.J. Alexander for his outstanding work in the Statlium communities. In December, we visited the Ashlew River Private Power Project and took photos of the dam that now blocks and diverts the river. In February, we went on the road for our Rivers at Risk campaign. Our first stop was Victoria, where we held an educational meeting on our work to keep BC's rivers wild and BC's power system in public hands. In March, our director Paul Morgan visited the Walker Wilderness area east of Prince George. This is the northern portion of the inland rainforest and has huge red cedar trees. While there, Paul took the time to visit the Mork Hill Falls. Local activists had earlier successfully stopped a private power project that was aimed at damming and diverting this beautiful wild river. Healthy Communities campaigner Ben West, alongside allies like Zero Waste BC, was working to stop a plan by Metro Vancouver to build garbage burning incinerators. In April, as part of our campaign to fight climate change, we published one of our newspapers calling for no more coal mines to be built in British Columbia. Well, that's it for now. If you would like to know more about how you can join or get involved or volunteer, go to wildernesscommittee.org. That's wildernesscommittee.org.